In the US, the military has a strong presence throughout different areas of the country. For many cities, the military is the sole reason they exist. For example, Killeen, the city next to Fort Cavazos, grew by over 1,700% in the 2 decades after the fort's establishment, from 1,260 at the 1940 census to 23,370 at the 1960 census. This means that Killeen's population basically doubled each year from 1940 to 1960. Killeen's population hasn't really slowed down either, averaging about 4% every year since the turn of the century, now standing at over 153,000 people. Instead of just looking at raw growth, we can also see how military bases impact development patterns in cities. One of the most extreme examples, Fayetteville, North Carolina, showcases just how stacked the development is towards the military base. Even right next to downtown, you can still see empty plots despite the continuous development for many miles to the north and west. Now that we've looked at 2 examples of how the military impacts cities, let's go through the list of cities with a military base. You can't just look at every military base and then list the city next to it. For the purpose of the video, we'll only look at cities with at least 100,000 in the immediate area of their respective forts. But first we have to go through some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut. First, Fort Stewart, city being Hinesville. Hinesville only has 30,000 people, but the area around it has another 50,000 people. It's pretty close to 100k and will likely hit it in the next 20 years. Fort Novosel, city being Enterprise, also has 30,000 people with another 30,000 in the surrounding area. There's also a city of 10,000, Ozark, on the other side of the base. Fort Wainwright, city being Fairbanks, surprisingly not at 100,000. The city itself only has 30,000, with only 60,000 in the surrounding area, so it's not enough to reach 100,000. Fort Devens, with city being Leominster and Fitchburg, it is submerged within the Boston exurbs, easily eclipsing 100,000, but no real city to study, with the closest towns being aforementioned Leominster and Fitchburg, which both have 40,000 people. Second to last honorable mention, Fort Sam Houston, city being San Antonio. Now this definitely does pass the population benchmark, but is more of an army headquarters instead of complete military base. And then there's the various military bases in Virginia. All of them qualify for the population requirement, but none of them are actual forts. Now that we have those out of the way, let's start with our first city, Lawton, Oklahoma. This one barely made the cut, 100,000 exactly. The military base here being Fort Sill, one of the older bases on the list, dating back to the end of the Civil War. The city isn't really growing because of the military base, likely due to its isolated location. There's roughly 20,000 soldiers stationed at Fort Sill. I also want to point out that there is a mall city center. We'd definitely like to see City Nerd attack this one. Next up is Manhattan, Kansas, which triples up as a copycat of New York, a college town, and most importantly for this video, a military town. Military base here is Fort Riley, located in nearby Junction City. The current active duty population of Fort Riley is just below 15,000. The Little Apple is still growing slowly today with help from both Fort Riley and Kansas State University. But now we move on to Fort Knox, arguably the most famous military fort in the country. The area has 145,000 people to secure the gold in this Andorra-sized vault. The 2 largest cities in the area are Radcliffe and Elizabethtown, with a combined population of 55,000. The current soldier population of Fort Knox is approximately 26,000. Our 4th military base is Fort Campbell, which is a bit special. It's the only military base that crosses state lines, with most of the training ranges and landmass in Tennessee and the headquarters and barracks in Kentucky. The city here is Clarksville, which itself has 170,000 people. There are really no more people in the metro area after that, just a few people on the Kentucky side next to the military base. The city is healthily growing today, being one of the fastest growing large cities in the country. Fort Campbell sits at a population of 27,000 soldiers. Now we move on to Columbus, Georgia. It has 300,000 people in the metro, 1/7 of its much larger cousin to the north. Home to Fort Moore, one of the larger military bases at 32,812 soldiers. Both Atlanta and the Airborne War Eagles are not far away from Columbus. Next up we go 3,450 miles away to Anchorage, being the largest American city for 1,400 miles in any direction. There is certain to be a large military base here, Fort Richardson. The base occupies most of the land between Anchorage and the Nick River to the northeast. With about 15,000 soldiers, it is the largest military base outside of the lower 48. Anchorage itself has nearly 300,000 people, with another 100,000 around the Matanuska River to the north. It was established during World War II as a home base for operations in the Aleutian Islands. We're now halfway through the military towns and on to Killeen. This quick rising city may only be the 7th biggest military city, but it contains over 34,000 soldiers. It is located within the Texas Triangle, not far away from Austin. I've already pointed out how the city grew 153,000 people in 70 years, and how it's the city most intertwined with its military base of all the examples. And we're not done with large military bases either. Now we're on to the big boy, Fort Liberty. As we already know, the city here is Fayetteville, and we've already pointed out the sketchy urban planning. It's also the single largest military base with a monstrous 43,000 stationed here. That's more than the population of this area of Nevada. There are 430,000 people here, but Pinehurst on the other side of the base has another 100,000 people, so Fort Liberty really has it going for them. We stay in the south and move on to Masterstown, Augusta. With 600,000 people in the metro and 20,000 active soldiers, this base is alive and well. I do want to point out that Fort Eisenhower isn't the only military installation in the Augusta area. On the South Carolina side is the ominous Savannah River site, one of the most secretive sites during the Cold War. Savannah River site itself employs another 10,000 people and was once responsible for the production and assembling of nuclear bombs. It's today known as one of the most contaminated places in the world thanks to their tritium mines on site. Our tour of nukes in the south is ended. We're climbing up 6,000 feet in elevation to Colorado Springs. The military base here is Fort Carson, located directly south of the city. Although the city of 730,000 is more well known for Pikes Peak and Garden of the Gods, it still has a very heavy military presence. Not only does it house Fort Carson with 26,500 soldiers, it also has the headquarters for NORAD, the agency responsible for notifying and defending the U.S. from nukes and missiles, multiple Space Force bases, as well as the Air Force Academy. Our third to last military base is Fort Jackson, one of the two military bases to be located in a capital. Located east of Columbia, South Carolina, it is surrounded on three sides by the Columbia Metro and has a soldier population of just 3,500, making it a considerably smaller base comparatively. Columbia has a population of 750,000 people. Our second to last base is none other than Fort Bliss, the only desert base on this list. Located at the western edge of Texas and El Paso, it is the closest military installment to the Mexican border. It functions more like any other base, though it does have a higher rate of soldiers being deployed abroad than other bases. Soldier population is 32,600 and the metro population is almost 900,000. Now we move on to the large military base with an even larger city. That is none other than Fort Lewis in Tacoma, Washington. Fort Lewis acts as a boundary for suburban Seattle, stopping it from reaching Olympia to the west and Yelm to the south. The base holds just over 30,000 soldiers. It may not be the biggest base, but it's the biggest city. To be fair to the other cities, decided to only include Pierce County, including Tacoma, and Thurston County, including Olympia, for the metro population, putting it at 1.2 million. All 13 cities are examples of how the U.S. military has a grasp around various cities all over the country, and that their presence has shaped, defined, and impacted these cities and others. Even if the military is one of the more controversial things in this country, there's no denying how communities, businesses, and people all benefit from its presence. That is to go without saying how I only included military bases in this comparison. I even dipped into the realm of Air Force bases or sea bases, which could feature places like Honolulu, San Diego, Destin, and more, on top of the cities in this video. With that many people, that many reasons, and that many places, that is how the military impacts the people of the US. The video is now over. Big sad. Recent scientific studies said clicking the subscribe button increases happiness by 15%, so that might help a bit. Maybe this video will cheer you up even more.